Finished.
Yes! Finally! My P-40 is done! Just a little off here. Just a bit off here. Done! Cool. Okay, now time for the references. Not really feeling a flying tigers. I mean, I could just buy a model for that. No, I'm feeling an early 1942 Pacific-era camo. Something simple. Oh, what are you, little guy? What a funny-looking thing. This should be a fun topic for a video. I mean, this can't possibly be that complicated. It won't turn into a month-long endeavor following leads just to hit dead end after dead end after dead end, finding information loops galore, and slowly losing sanity from the sheer amount of nothing collected despite the huge amount of research effort put into every instance of this process. No. No. Wait, don't go, don't leave. This TIE fighter-looking thing has been my unmovable rock, which is funny considering it looks like an old photoshopped military plane from the early 2000s. You remember the ones. Or you know how World War II and general aviation inspired a lot of Star Wars designs? Well, this looks like if that was in reverse. If someone from the Star Wars universe was making a plane for a movie they wanted to call Earth Wars, Revenge of the Fascists. Alright, I think that's enough. Hello all, my name is the Flying Historian, and today I'd like to share with you my journey in discovering the hidden secrets behind the ever-elusive twin P-40. I was younger, more naive back then, working on a tough case, researching the SM-79. It was now the 4th month in a row that I'd been working on it, when she walked in. I decided to start where this all began. It led me to this adorable chat room where a modeler wanted to show off his next creation. I highly recommend checking it out. Watching the process is very fascinating, and he did a great job. Anyway, he did provide some information on the craft, so let's read. He mentions that this is the only known photograph of this plane, that it has been a big mystery within the aviation community. He explains that there are no records of a twin P-40. The serial number, which can be seen on the tail, belongs to a P-40C. The rear fuselage is, obviously, from a D, E, or F model. Seems a little funny to say it obviously looks like 3 different models, but we'll get to that later. The 2 engines which rest atop the wings are Merlin type, probably from the F model. He ends by saying that without more images or information, the actual shape and size of the aircraft is hard to pinpoint. Recognizing that this is just a glorified blog, I decided to go to the most reliable source the web has ever known, one which any good researcher begins their knowledge journey on: Wikipedia. Surprisingly, I found virtually nothing there. Again, only 1 photo has been found. The 2 engines are Merlin engines. I did learn the serial number, 4113456, a problem I was having since the images I was finding online were crusty. Wikipedia also claimed that the canopy belonged to an early Hawk 87 model. Now, just because Wikipedia doesn't have a lot of information on something doesn't mean the end of the world. It might just mean you are onto something really good. More importantly, however, I want to point something out that will be important throughout this investigation. Come closer, Watson. Look here, my good sir. Yes. Our old nemesis, speculation, noted as fact. Careful, my trusted assistant. She can be enticing, but be very wary of her siren calls. Alright, anyway, you still with me? Good. Okay, follow me. Soon after exploring the official wiki, I stumbled upon this blog-style source. They believed, based from what I could tell was models people had made, that the aircraft would have been a ground attack aircraft who would use big guns mounted in the nose to strafe targets on the ground. Again, nothing really substantial here. Sorry, I'm just looking for a little more commitment right now. You'll find someone, I promise. God, I hate dating apps. The next move was to see where the photos being posted online were coming from. The one with the best resolution I could find led me to Reddit. Of course. I typically keep a Grinch's distance from war Reddit, but I was hungry, Watson. Chomping at the bit, if you will. I need to slurp up a sweet, noodly lead so I can plant my lips on some truth about this thing. Don't judge me. The aircraft was supposedly a mock-up, said the post, glaring at me with a stupid smug. Little to no information is known about it beyond that. How do you know it's a mock-up, but basically nothing else? That doesn't even make any sense. I mean, I have seen conspiracy theories with more meat than... You're right. It's just Reddit. It's not worth it. Ah! Desperation was starting to hit. I could feel its ugly head turning to face me. I was just clicking on anything at this point. From this dude's site, he claimed to have received many emails from those who had discovered the same mystery plane, and supposedly had been researching the topic for decades with no luck. Again, nothing new popped up. The aircraft seemed to be a hodgepodge of different P-40 models. The site offered that it was possible that certain parts may have been made of wood or were merely aluminum casings, the carpet not matching the drapes type situation. Again, total speculation with no leads in sight. I was losing hope. When luck finally started to reward me for my diligence. This would be the holy grail when it came to really diving deep into this rabbit hole. User Chuck Anderson began the thread on July 26th, 2006? That's almost 20 years ago. That's crazy. I know, the historian being surprised by the passage of time, but listen here, okay? I'm still human. Anderson started the thread by sharing a diagram of the twin P-40, which was published in Unknown, Volume 4 by J. Miranda and P. Mercado. Discussions on the topic expanded to include what the authors said, even supposedly the author themselves sharing what they wrote. See, some didn't even believe the thing was real at first, until some other users shared inklings of its existence through the image we are aware of. Others, like user MaAccountTraPilot, shared other designs using the P-40, which turned this beautiful bird into some sort of cruel Frankenstein monster. In this case, it was a what if the P-38 Lightning had a drunken one-night stand with the pretty blonde P-40 who regularly sits at the end of the bar. Though a lot of these spoof designs were quickly called out for what they were. Sometimes even the what-if model artist spoke up to confirm suspicions about the authenticity of the designs. Many shared that the actual designs seemed strange or not well thought out. Some said that model makers have put more thought into the nose, engine placement, and how the landing gear would work. The chain ends a few years later in 2015 with user GTX agreeing with one user's comment, hypothesizing that it was an on-the-ground trainer cobbled together using parts from wrecks. Now, most importantly, interspersed throughout this thread are mentions of sources that hold way more credibility than any other source we have covered so far. This was the gold mine we had been looking for, Watson. Let us dive into this warm bosom of knowledge and start digging. Let's start digging. I decided to take a cursory look into the serial number which we had found a while earlier. I found 2 online sources that some had commented on. Funnily enough, both sources were referred to by name, And by that, I just mean like the name of the dude. Like if Google was just called Jim.com. Gosh, what was that actor's name again? Just use Jim. No, not again. Holy shit, it's an actual site. What is this, a bank? Oh, hi. Jeremy states that it, a P-40C, was assigned in 1942 to be used as the basis for a mock-up for a twin-engine fighter. No exact date, though. The aircraft was condemned on February 27th, 1943. Joe said basically the same thing. A P-40C, modified in 1942 for a mock-up twin-engine fighter, was present at Craig Field, Alabama on February 18, 1943, before being condemned a few days later on February 27, 1943. So that is certainly something. I mean, records of this aircraft being heavily modified sometime in 1942 gives us at least a date, though it doesn't quite paint a whole picture. Liar!
Huh?
The data, Jack. The data. I got boxes full of data. No, wait. Let me spare you. I'm assuming we're gonna find out what that was all about later. Starting with what got user Anderson to post about this aircraft in the first place, Unknown, Volume 4. It is always important to double-check the authors writing this material because the last thing you want is to think you have broken the ice on a cold case just to find the source that you used was written by a journalist from The Onion. So, Justo Miranda, you feeling lucky today? He has been writing about aviation since the 1980s, specializing in aviation history of the 1930s. From what I could find, he jump-started his career through his works analyzing aircraft of the Spanish Civil War. His career would change completely when, in 1996, he uncovered a microfilm depicting secret German weapons. This would be his golden ticket to Money City, baby. If you want to sell books as an aviation historian and be a star on the History Channel and make other historians' jobs so much harder, then you write about secret World War II German war-winning weapons. I see the hustle. I recognize the hustle. This fascination with German experimental and hypothetical aviation led him to expand his view to other nations, which is how we ended up with an entry on the twin P-40. His past books have the vibe of being a textbook-level quality, but the ones that seem to be advertised most when looking him up are his works into often mythic creations of the Second World War. I am extremely critical of these thumbnail cover books, so I will be extra careful while examining his work. Next, I took a look at his co-author and literally could not find anything on this guy. Looks like he had a similar career as Miranda, but that is just based on the library of his work which I could find. Okay, so I'm gonna be honest. This next part happened long after looking into the book, but I feel as though it is important to share this before we dive into the content. I found it. I finally found it. Yes! They released it digitally. Interesting. Yes. Nothing. No? That's okay. Thankfully, the golden thread was full of what was written down in the entry. The OP and potentially the author released their work online. Quote, in 1942, the engineers of the Curtiss Wright Corporation developed a twin-engined heavy fighter based on the P-40 model. The project followed the same philosophy of design used in the Grumman XF-5F1 and XP-50, the IMAM RO-57, and the Westland Whirlwind interceptors. A mock-up was built using the airframe of the P-40C, serial number 4113456, the cockpit of a P-40D, and two Packard V1650-1 Merlin 20 engines and nose cowling from two P-40F. There is no additional information available. Based on the only existing picture, we have speculatively drawn the 5-view scale drawing. Apparently, seriously? The airplane had a great
Longitudinal.
instability and bad landing performance. Perhaps these were the reasons why it was never manufactured. Technical data based on what? Alright, well, clearly they found some pretty substantial sources if this is what they were able to share, right? I mean, they aren't talking out of their behinds, right? I mean, they even cite their sources, something we have yet to come across. The chase is still on. Follow the lead. Ugh. Okay, next step. Time to look at those who really shoved their noses into the books. Or probably more accurately, got their nose shoved into a book. Ernie McDowell became interested in aircraft after his uncle took him to see, presumably, it wasn't very clear, an air show as a boy. He would later join the USAAF cadet program in 1942. He would be a member of several aviation historical societies, but importantly for us, he would be the first to present to the world this mysterious creature. He wrote that it was a twin-engine P-40 design that at least reached the mock-up stage. The aircraft seemed to have been a P-40C with the serial number we discovered at the start of all of this. The canopy is of the middle style, referring to the D model. The engines are F-type Merlins. The right side of the right engine nacelle bears a shark mouth. We can see here the basis for many of the claims that would come about much later.
Oh!
No, Watson!
Huh?
Do not be so easily swayed by this temptress. Seriously though, this is like the second time. Keep it in your pants, man. Ernest McDowell credited NASM throughout the book, so most historians assume that this uncredited image also came from this expedition. NASM would have just recently received the Curtis collection, where the photo may have originated, but it is very important to remember that McDowell never cited anything here. But what about NASM? Shh. Spoilers, my dear Watson. The next and most cited dude when it comes to this, is the one, the only, Peter M. Bowers. He was considered the journalist and historian for aviation at the time. A Seattleite and Boeing engineer, when Boeing was actually good, he dabbled in his very own golden age of flight dreams and designed his own plane, the mono/biplane hybrid Flybaby Bybaby. Cute! In the mid-1960s, he also helped build working models of famous aircraft, such as a Fokker triplane, a Fokker D-8, and even a Wright Model EX. His credentials check out. In his 1979 book titled Curtiss Aircraft, 1907 through 1947, Bowers wrote, "In 1942, P-40C 41-13456 was modified to become the mock-up of an undesignated twin-engine fighter. Packard Merlin engines and nose cowlings from P-40Fs or Kitty Hawk 2s were adapted to nacelles fitted to the top of the P-40C wing. No further information is available." A P-40C was used to create this full-scale mock-up of a twin-engined Curtiss Pursuit. National Air and Space Museum. That's it? What about the 1942 date? Well, it explains perhaps why we have been seeing that date everywhere. Keep in mind that Bowers cites NASM, who many presume to be the source used by McDowell, which raises the question, why didn't McDowell mention the 1942 date? I mean, there is virtually no information on this thing. I don't see any need to leave what little information on it out. Even if McDowell left stuff out, won't we find it if we speak to Silence. Not yet, my sweet. Oof. Hey, ow. Ooh. Quote, twin XP-40. One of the more extreme P-40 modifications proposed was a twin-engine version. No military designation was assigned, and no Curtiss model number is known, but it did get to the full mock-up stage using the fuselage of P-40C 41-13456, and two Packard V1650-1 engines. Nothing came of this late 1942 project. Curtiss even toyed with a twin-engine fighter. This was not a P-40 replacement, but representative of some far-out thinking. What we see here is a mock-up of a twin-engine fighter developed on a P-40C airframe. National Air and Space Museum, end quote. NASM, huh? Okay, Bowers and McDowell and everyone else. Let's go pay NASM a little visit, yeah?
20 minutes later.
And now, we wait. Yeah, just go on ahead and move on. This is gonna take a while. Somewhere in the thread, someone shared an Italian article regarding the aircraft from the magazine
Aerei nella storia.
I was not able to find the original source, so this is an unconfirmed quote, translated by somebody. I don't consider it a source, but it brings something up that I think is important to our investigation. The article supposedly claims that the Twin P-40 was part of the XP-50 competition, or the XP-71 project. The magazine goes on to state that the Twin P-40 was designed around 1940 to 1942. It could have used the V1710 Allison engine,
the XH2600 Pratt & Whitney, V12 Continental, or the Packard-built V1650 Merlin engine.
Though it immediately follows all of that by saying there is no documentation, and so basically everything they claim just came from the most trustworthy source, their ass. Really not helpful, but the more observant of you would have seen what I did when I read this. In the late 1930s, the US AAF requested a heavy twin-engine interceptor. Grumman was joined by Belanca, Brewster, Curtiss, Lockheed, and Vought to compete for the government's attention. Grumman's Design 34, and later G41, was chosen to move to the prototype stage by the US AAC on the 25th of November 1939. The well-known XP-50 would win second place to Lockheed's Xi'an Timu remix of the P-38, the XP-49. Yes, I am aware the XP-49 was supposed to be the next step for the P-38, but there's a reason you've never heard of it. For all intents and purposes, it looks like only Grumman, Lockheed, and Belanca managed to have proposals. Curtiss could have had this ready, but it would be strange that they got so far as a mock-up without there so much as being a mention anywhere regarding its connection to the US AAC Proposal 39775. Its absence from any records is made especially strange when you consider that other entries, such as the XP-50, got so much more attention, due in part for its unique design. Perhaps it's because the XP-50 clearly got further along, or maybe it was out of embarrassment that Curtiss didn't talk more about their entry. I'm not sure. Next, we have the XP-71 project by Curtiss. Hitting a bit closer with this one, but several discrepancies pop up pretty quickly. Curtiss started the project in the early 1940s with the aim of building a heavy long-range fighter interceptor to help bombers reach their targets. When we say long-range, we really mean it. The intention was that this aircraft could perform its duties even if Britain fell to the Third Reich. The project was going to be quite ambitious. Engineers intended for it to have a pressurized cockpit and driven by two massive turbocharged pusher Pratt & Whitney R4360 radial engines. It was to be armed to the teeth with heavy 37mm and 75mm cannons. It was projected to be as large as a B-25. The US AAF ordered two prototypes in November 1941, though Curtiss, at the time, was already full up working on other projects and could not begin the construction of yet another large and far more complex aircraft. By early 1942, The need for such a project was growing less and less, and so the project was cancelled. One major issue not discussed here is the twin P-40. There is enough information here that it would be very strange if they didn't even mention the weirdo. Plus, it simply doesn't look like it. I mean, it doesn't even look like it would be the catalyst for the XP-71. The timeline doesn't fit either. Certain parts potentially used to build the twin P-40 wouldn't even be available so early on in 1941 or early 1942. Wouldn't make sense for a prototype/mock-up of this, which would start construction roughly at the same time where this would be possible to build. Has NASM responded? No go, boss. I got one more guy. Another influential source on this topic is that of Dan Hagedorn. Specifically, the book Curtiss Fighter Aircraft, A Photographic History, 1917 through 1948. The general consensus of their work on the topic is that the twin P-40 was a hoax. That's an interesting theory, but very vague. Let's see what exactly they mean. Okay, but just as before, let's see who's yapping. Francis Dean served in the U.S. Navy during World War II. Afterward, he would graduate from MIT as an aeronautical engineer. He worked for 30 years at the Curtiss Wright Company and Boeing. At Curtiss Wright, Dean headed preliminary design, specifically on efforts developing a VTOL aircraft. He was also an author for a wide range of books covering aviation history. Dan Hagedorn is a U.S. veteran with 30 years of service. Dan specializes in Latin American aviation history. An author of many books, he also served as the senior curator and director of collections at the Museum of Flight from 2008 to 2016. Remember, guys, to tell your grandparents that the internet is a scary and sometimes dangerous place. Anyway, I managed to find a way to respectfully contact him. Jackpot. Hi, I was wondering if you remember anything about the research you did on the twin P-40?
Well, I reprised the subject again in an issue of the Quarterly Journal of the American Aviation Historical Society, at which time I was able to add a few more details gleaned from a stereoscopic examination of the original image, which was found in the Peter M. Bowers collection at the Museum of Flight in Seattle. These revealed that the image was, in fact, taken at Buffalo near the Curtiss plant, on the southwest corner of the field, thus establishing that Curtiss must have been aware of the apparatus at some level. I also consulted a number of very experienced aeronautical engineers, who all concluded that the P-40 Wayne would not possibly support two engines of this size, not to mention the standard undercarriage. Thus we concluded it was a piece of wartime misinformation.
Oh, wow. I got a response. Okay, cool. Thank you so much. I'm a huge fan of the Museum of Flight and all. Thank you for the leads, but, Mr. Museum Man, could you, maybe, I don't know, expand a bit on your theory that it was a wartime misinformation as you called it, Uwu? Nothing? This is becoming a theme. A really annoying theme. After talking with Dan, I decided to go read the article he praised and see what I could find. Dan's article begins with a short list of the published works which discuss the twin P-40. Ernest McDowell's was first, followed by Peter Bowers' works, and finally the title for which Dan co-authored. Now, Dan is clear that the first has a presumed accreditation of NASM. Peter credits NASM, and Dan credits both Peter and NASM. I'm noticing an information loop here. Dan, who also held a leadership role at NASM before the Museum of Flight, shares some of the research he conducted on the topic while there. He found no unusual entry on the aircraft's individual aircraft record card. That relates to the aircraft's serial number. Due to how reports were written back then, such a radical change to the aircraft not even being hinted at is exceedingly rare. Now, based on this fact alone, Dan concludes that the aircraft serial number must have been chosen at random. He also contributes the sequential pattern to this conclusion as well. So for Dan, it just so happens that this thing has the same serial number as an actual military P-40C. Of course, he goes over the basics just as everyone before him. The aircraft has a pre-June 1942 camo, but the national insignia is not present on the wings. It has a H-87 short tail, a truncated forward fuselage at the firewall. Hey, look at that, a new observation, wow!
Write that down, write that down!
Of course, the two engines, P-40D style canopy, and the engines seem to be variant F Merlin engines. Oh, and the right engine has a shark's mouth painted on it. A review of the NASM pre-1946 USAF still photo collection did not identify a match with the clearly permanent hangar seen in the background. Dan claims to have identified the building in the background to the left as the 1940s era Buffalo Municipal Airport Terminal building. Just so happens that the airport was near the largest manufacturing facilities building P-40s during World War II. Dan also spotted the silhouette of a C-46 in the background, which he states indicates a warfighting year. He states that aeronautical engineers, many who specialized in structure, all agreed that the standard wing would not support the weight or stresses of the two Merlin engines, nor have the wherewithal to deal with the extra fuel needed to support those engines. Dan says that with its close proximity to Curtiss, they must have known about it. Dan would pose some theories which we'll go over later, but ultimately he offers that it may have been a decoy. Fine, I'll cough it up, Dan. Here's my money, since I can't seem to find this book anywhere. Time to tap at the source of this oil. One photo exists, okay. Ooh, appears upon careful examination to be a rather elaborate hoax. Here we go, now we're getting somewhere. Marked with the serial number of an actual P-40C, alright, has a short tail, blah blah blah. Unknown where the aircraft was imaged, aged like milk over here. Welcome to being a studying historian. Structural aeronautical engineers all agreed that the aircraft's wing and undercarriage are cringe, got it. Ah, here. Historians of the aircraft have, to date, been completely baffled by this apparition, and the consensus seems to be that it may have been assembled as a decoy or intelligence misinformation token. That's it? Again? Are you serious? This is nothing. Everyone is taking this as gospel? Come on! I mean, this doesn't get us anywhere. Historians seem to think it to be a decoy or intelligence misinformation token. Who? The only historians I have heard that from so far is you, Dan. Everyone else has given the same 3 facts about the thing and thrown a 1942 stamp on its derriere for good measure. I mean, turmoil has engulfed the Galactic Republic. The taxation of trade routes to outlying stars is in dispute. Hoping to resolve the matter with a blockade of deadly battleships, the greedy
You've got mail.
It's here. Hey!
What?
It's here. NASM, they responded. Fuck. Yes, it's time. We tried our best, but this is everything we could find for you, Chief. On the back of the photo, it reads, joke or mock-up of a twin-engine P-40. No date or name, though. The IARC paints quite the picture of this plane's life. The P-40C in question was received by the Air Corps on March 17, 1941, and placed in service at Patterson Field, Ohio. At the beginning of July, it was turned over to Curtiss briefly before going to Mitchell Field, New York on July 3, 1941. By the end of July, it was inventoried as in service in New York. On August 1st, 1941, it was wrecked in a landing gear collapse at Mitchell Field. From then until December, it was inventoried as under repair, after which it went unreported until April 17th, 1942, when it was transferred to Middleton Air Depot in Pennsylvania. On May 13th, 1942, it was transferred to Wright Field, Ohio. Then on May 20th, it was turned over to Ferry Command and shipped to Long Beach Army Airfield, California. It was assigned to Morris Field, Charlotte, North Carolina on June 25th, 1942. A few days later, on July 1st, 1942, it was assigned to the San Angelo Army Airfield in Texas, but was reassigned to Craig Field in Selma on July 9th. It would remain at Craig Field until November 14th, when it returned to Wright Field. On January 3rd, 1943, it again returned to Selma, but on January 11th, it was transferred to the Wellston Air Depot Group. On February 27th, 1943, it was condemned and removed from the Army Air Force's inventory. NASM archivists and librarians even went above and beyond for me and looked at Curtiss experimental projects to see if there was a stone left unturned there. In mid-1941, Curtiss was working on a number of destroyer aircraft, multi-engine, multi-cannon planes, as per an Army Air Corps request. Though, the only records NASM have regarding Curtiss's destroyer aircraft phase deal with radial engines R-2160 and R-3350, and not the Merlin engines attached to this craft. Not to say that this wasn't a proposal, simply to say that NASM couldn't find anything hinting that it might have been. You know what they didn't find despite me asking? That's right, nothing about that damn 1942 year. Well, I'll be. What? Huh? Oh, are you all caught up? Alright, good. Now, listen, I have rewritten the latter half of this video 6 or 7 times now. It's been long enough that I have a new mic. There's a lot to cover, but honestly, I think there are really only 3 questions one needs to ask to come to the bottom of this mystery. Starting with... But Mr. Flying Historian, didn't Hagedorn identify the... Throughout this investigation, I've had to deal with sourceless claims, or claims citing sources that don't seem to exist. Hagedorn claimed to have found where the photo was taken, but it was presented more as a statement, and he didn't expand much. Pardon me if this investigation has led me to be a bit more skeptical of our reliable sources. NASM helped me narrow down when and where this thing could have come to fruition based on the aircraft's IARC. Here are the likely periods they proposed. I will also be looking at Wellston Air Depot Group in Georgia, as that was the last place we know for certain the aircraft was located at. I'm crossing off when it was sent to Curtiss in 1941 due to some of the pieces, such as the Model F engine and engine cowling, not being available until August 1941 at the earliest. The first thing I noticed was that the large permanent hangars here have pointed roofs instead of rounded roofs. They also have a different door design. Though, I did really like this cute checkered pattern on the roofs. I was unable to find this unique looking brick building. Plus, the large buildings behind that don't seem to match any I could find at Mitchell Field. Finally, the layout of the base is too dense for the photo to have been taken there. Afuera! Next, we will check the very famous Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Before we go on though, NASM was unable to find any reference of this aircraft in either their Wright Field or Patterson Field collections from 1940 through 1952. Anyway, we run into some of the same issues as before. The airfield is super dense, and I just wasn't able to find the background buildings in any photograph of the time. These hangars are closer in design to the ones we are looking for, but as you can see, they aren't matches. In this 1945 image of Wright Field, there is this hangar here that looks close, but none of the surrounding buildings match. Plus, the taxiway texture doesn't match that of the image. This one is not it. I won't waste your time here. All the similarities I could find, like the rounded roofs and such, share in the reasons they aren't what we are looking for, as we discussed for the other bases. That leaves us with Hagedorn's theory, that the photo was taken at the Buffalo Municipal Airport. I know I said I was skeptical, but honestly, I think he's right. This is the Buffalo Municipal Airport. How quaint! Curtiss had a huge plant just off the airport where they mostly constructed P-40s and C-46 cargo aircraft. This is a different angle of the airport taken in 1947. This was the image I used to determine that Hagedorn's theory seems to be credible.
I believe our mystery plane is here, facing this way. Our cameraman is just behind him, the Curtiss plant's behind them. In the photograph, you can see the large cylindrical tower with the glass dome, plus a little sliver of additional building, and at this angle, that would make sense. You can also see the building behind that, the large flat-top building with the small windows. Upon careful examination, it does look like there's a crease or some sort of 90-degree angle. In the aerial photograph, you can clearly see that there is a 90-degree angle here. Everything seems to match.
This would also match Dan's description given in his article. Are we actually getting somewhere finally? No! So, is it made of metal, or wood, or what? Unfortunately, we cannot say for certain, but based on the fact that it is very clearly a collection of different P-40 parts, I'd harbor a solid guess that this thing is made of metal. Now, which models of P-40 is it made of is a different beast to tackle. Both those online and historians we've covered claim that the tail belongs to a short-tail Hawk 87. I found in McDowell's Curtiss P-40 in action that the P-40Cs allocated for Hawk model H81A3s were 41-13328 through 13520, which would cover our gal here. Under careful inspection, it does look like this aircraft has a short tail, but it's possible that this is just the way the tail was attached, and therefore not a Hawk 87 short tail. That would follow in the Frankenstein's monster theme of construction. What about the next biggest piece? The wings and fuselage. Assumptions on that seem to stem from the P-40C serial number on the tail. Due to the mystery of the tail, I would remain cautious to say outright that the fuselage and wings belong to the same body the tail originated from. Unfortunately, I could not discern enough from the image to exactly identify the model of P-40. The cowlings are definitely from the Model F. None of the other models share the smooth top like the F. Because of that, the engines inside, if there are any, must be Merlins, as the Allison, although used in more variants, would not fit in the F model cowlings, requiring a structural change in order to fit and work properly. As for the canopy, I searched through tons of variations and came up with so many differing options that I'd be hard-pressed to pinpoint an exact model for which the canopy came from. Of course, the lack of additional photos does not help either. The last thing I'd like to mention is the odd intentionality of certain aspects of the aircraft, while others went to the wayside. The cockpit looks
pretty clean for a cobbled up piece of work. More obvious things, like those aerodynamic looking fins behind the engines, are another example of this strange intentionality. These are clearly custom made, so a certain amount of thought was put into it, but stuff like this clashes with other big things that seem to have gone completely overlooked. The critique I noticed the most had to do with the landing gear, which seems to have been unchanged from the base model P-40. They should really retract up into the engines like planes of similar design. The engine placement is really bad. They should be more flush with the wings or underslung like other planes. Finally, many have had their own interpretation of the nose for this plane, but I agree with Hagedorn here. If you look closely, it appears that the nose is missing right around where it would be if the fuselage had been scrapped. Alright, you have all that? Just find somewhere in that big brain of yours. Fit it somewhere like an IKEA shelf. Okay, so there really are two bubbles of thought regarding what this thing is, but historians have landed on the idea that the general consensus right now is that it was an official project built in 1942 and/or another war-fighting year. I'd love to start with the supporting evidence, but honestly there really isn't any. So the next few minutes are going to be a boy beats up old man style fight. Ring that bell, cause here we go. I want to start with that dreaded 1942 year, which I believe was perpetuated by Peter Bowers in not just one source, but several. Anyway, Bowers cites NASM for his research, but both myself and Hagedorn, who worked closely with NASM on this topic, found zilch when it came to evidence that this thing was built in 1942. If Peter Bowers found some magical document or interviewed someone, then he didn't keep that information because it wasn't in his collection at the Museum of Flight either. Now, Dan Hagedorn was the only one I could find post-Bowers who pivoted away from 1942 by simply saying war-fighting year. However, he only gave some circumstantial evidence supporting his theory, and I don't think it's enough to definitively state that this plane was built during that time. The pre-June 1942 camo is one observation, though the US insignia is not present on the wings, so if this was an official paint job, someone must have been seriously reprimanded. Dan claims a C-46, which can be seen in the background of the photo, is another piece of evidence. Can't see it? I don't blame you. It's here. This dark silhouette off by the brick building. It certainly has a similar shape, and a C-46 being in that exact spot isn't impossible, but I don't like this evidence for a different reason, other than the lack of certainty. Do you remember the big Curtiss factory located just behind the photographer? You know, the factory churning out P-40s and C-46s throughout the war, the big factory that would have these planes lying around during and after the war. I don't really think its presence is proof of much, but that's just a theory. A plane theory! But we aren't done. Sit back down. I haven't seen anyone discuss that. If this was a wartime endeavor, then how do you explain its service life? We have its IARC, so let's assume that modifications were made while it was in service. In our hypothetical, it doesn't necessarily matter when these modifications happened. Don't get cocky though. Also, let's assume that no one else at these bases ever thought of taking a picture or even mentioning this thing ever. When one simple question is asked, this whole hypothetical that we're building kind of crumbles. How and why was it shipped everywhere, or shipped at all? Right? Like, this thing would need to be transported to each destination by boat, train, car, somehow. Even if it was in some sort of completed state, why ship the whole damn plane? Just ship the necessary pieces to wherever the plane is. Better, make it at a base used specifically for testing top secret projects. It would make even less sense to ship this thing if it was top secret. Much easier to keep a secret if you aren't shipping it across the states for all to see. Even if this thing was more complete than what's seen in the photo, why in the world would the military spend that much money, manpower, and time on this? It would make more sense to transport something useful? Something that has potential rather than some pet project Curtis pulled from the garbage. Now, if it wasn't shipped, then it would have to fly itself, but that would fly in the face of every engineer that I and others have spoken to who said there would be no way this thing would be airworthy. I'm no flat earther thinking all engineers and scientists are lying about something's flight characteristics.
I don't believe that we landed on a moon.
Okay. To imply that the Earth is flat, you aren't just saying that NASA is lying. You're implying there's a conspiracy involving the world's 71 space agencies, 13 of which have launching capabilities. Not every single person in them is lying or being fooled by their respective companies. For every single astrophysicist in the world is, by your implication, a scam artist getting paid to do. So roughly 75,000 people are lying about what they do for a living. A program that under the United States government could possibly pull off this sort of conspiracy, but the fact that all 71 space agencies around the world are also taking part in some conspiracy, and every astronomer and astrophysicist and astronaut is also part of the same. It just seems that so many different people are involved in this major conspiracy.
Yeah.
It is much more likely that 4113456 remained a P-40C its entire service life. Let's move away from the war year claim to another theory, that it was a decoy or a permanent on-the-ground trainer. I don't think either of these hold water. As a decoy, this was way more work than was typical. Broadly speaking, decoys were typically made of wood, straw, or specially made inflatables. No, not those. As for a trainer, I don't know why you would construct such a robust trainer aircraft, one which does not look like or would act like any plane the US AAF was flying at the time. Seems like it would be the worst trainer plane, or Curtis was using it to train their engineers what not to build. The most likely theory that I have read is that this was a mock-up for something greater. The design isn't entirely outlandish. I mean, there are planes out there with far more information on them that look wackier than this. But like we discussed, the heavy fighter projects which people have brought up, the XP-50 or the XP-71, they just don't match. I was unable to find any heavy fighter project by Curtis that fit the description of this aircraft. I get where people are coming from. This thing looks experimental, so the logical step is to look at other experimental aircraft of the time. The twin P-40 does look weird, but it looks more like a variant rather than an entirely new experimental plane. So was there ever a time when Curtis wanted to make a twin P-40? Since the introduction of the Merlin-engined P-40F in January 1942, Curtis sought to keep pace with the rapid modernization of aircraft and air warfare. They would return to the Allison V1710 engine with the K model and would stick with it. A key requirement for later models was weight reduction. Even with the last attempt to modernize the old girl, the XP-40Q, weight reduction was always emphasized in their design philosophy. Adding a second engine was certainly not part of this reduction. There was a desperation at Curtis to continue building prop-driven planes even after the war. There was a certain fixation on modernizing the P-40, but nothing ever dipped into the realm of twin-engine stuff. Alright. I think he's had enough. In any other YouTube video, this is where it would cut to live action and I would step out and say that we haven't been able to find anything. Then I would be all, but y'all aren't ready for the start of this reveal.
And it starts right now!
Something we haven't brought up yet is that the plane and the picture don't need to be connected. In fact, if this aircraft was built during the war, the idea that the photo was taken around that time too would be ridiculous. Have you ever heard of a special military project being photographed outside at a municipal airport next to a well-known military plant in a country so paranoid of spies they imprison their own citizens in camps, all during the war? Yeah, silly. Before y'all get too excited, I still don't think that supports the idea that it was built during the war. Right now, it seems contemporary historians agree that this thing was built as a hoax or some sort of misinformation project. Your guess as to what the hell that means is as good as mine. I've read everything that holds this opinion. I've even spoken with the guy who came up with it, and I still don't have an answer as to what they mean exactly. Ultimately, I believe that the US was not so incompetent to think for a moment that this would work, whether that be the idea that it could fly, or that it would trick our adversaries. See, I don't think this was a hoax. I think it was a joke. My guess was that this little hodgepodge Lego build was the product of the boys up at 3 a.m. looking for beans. And probably beer was a contributing factor somewhere in there. I'm not the first to propose this, but I'm pretty sure I'm the first to propose this after doing all the legwork to confidently say something similar. Here, follow me. A few things speak to me when analyzing this theory. How, under the untrained eye, it looks like it could potentially fly. The fact that it was built using just what was lying around. Oh, and my contribution to this all, minus everything I've done already. Do you see that? That right there? Well, I haven't heard anyone else say a thing about it. That little wingtip, just out of sight. Where else have you seen an airplane angled like this with another so close by? Oh wow, there's like a sparkly cloud there. Just get in the cloud, Watson. Oh, okay, alright, yeah, I'm coming. I think at this municipal airport in New York, just outside the famous Curtiss plant, at the end of a global conflict, and teeming with bored engineers or craftsmen, with time and an abundance of cheap scrap lying around, a few guys came together and constructed this machine of imagination.
Good job,
Maybe this was built for an air show. This was whipped up for comedic relief, like how we used to laugh at disabled people forced to join the circus. Maybe it was just another afternoon with a couple beers and time to kill. Whatever it was, I am fairly certain that this was a product of post-war tomfoolery. Is it a satisfactory answer? I have mixed feelings, but I do think it is a more reasonable answer based on the evidence I have seen. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that what I think is 100% true. It looks like the picture was taken in the afternoon, so if this was an air show, where are all the people? Was this a few days before the air show? Why would they present an oddity with no nose? Why not go all the way? Did you run out of money? Time? What if it isn't an air show, just some wealthy guy's garage baby? Why make this, though, after spending all that money? The fact that it is so close to Curtiss, shouldn't that mean that someone at Curtiss, at the very least, looked out the window and laughed at the silly thing, wrote about it, or told someone at some point? See? Still enough questions that I simply can't say for absolute certain that I'm right. Ultimately, Watson, we just don't know. We need someone's grandpa to die and donate all of his old junk to a museum. Or some Redditor to find another picture after sifting through a dusty, moldy crate of old film, sitting in some antique store. The ones you see big signs for off the highway on a road trip. Until then, this will remain a mystery. If you are here, thank you so much for watching the whole video. I know it was a long one, but I thought it would be important to go through everything I found. If you like what I do have some more videos. Comment, like, subscribe, do all the things, press all the buttons. It really helps me grow and deliver more content to you all. Thank you again for watching, and I guess I'll see you in the next one.